Our next speaker is a very well-known man in interfaith work, perhaps one of the best well-known rabbis of interfaith work, David Rosen, who is a British Israeli rabbi, former chief rabbi of Ireland. And as I said before, one of the most well-known, I think, Jewish rabbinic authorities in interfaith work. He will be talking about Halachic imperatives for environmental sustainability.
Thank you. I don't need a microphone. Any מצגת, אני כבר לפני המבול. So it's a pleasure to be with you. This subject is so extensive, so by definition I have to limit myself, and of course there's an enormous amount of resonance with the wonderful things we've just heard. But looking around here, I'm reminded of the famous story, actually I heard this from Miriam about the man who survived the flood in Pottsville, Pennsylvania. There was a massive flood and he was the sole survivor. And he was invited by people and places to give a presentation. And he would speak about how he was the sole survivor of the flood in Pottsville, Pennsylvania. And he made a nice living out of it. After a while, he leaves this earthly abode and he goes up to the pearly gates. And there the angel Gabriel receives him and says, "Welcome. As a new resident, you're invited to give a lecture this evening to the residents here. But I need to post it. Could you tell me what the title will be?" He said, "Of course, my title will be How I Survived the Flood in Pottsville, Pennsylvania." The angel Gabriel said, "Are you sure that's what you want to talk about?" He said, "Listen, Gabriel, I made a pretty good living down there talking about that." He said, "Okay, you can talk about that, but you should know, Noah is in the audience." So there are plenty of people who know the subject as well as me, if not better, and therefore, for those who I bring absolutely no enlightenment, I apologized in advance. Allow me then to continue with another story, but a true story. To the best of my knowledge, that one wasn't. And I came to the States. I was invited to speak at a conference at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, where they have a Center for Sustainability in the Global Environment, a remarkable center, actually. And when I arrived at the border control, then, of course, the officer there asked me what the purpose of my visit was. So I told him I was going to speak at a conference. He says, "And what's the subject?" I said, "Religion and the environment." And he said to me, "What's religion got to do with the environment?" I said, "Are you religious?" He said, "Yes, actually, I'm a practicing Catholic." So I said, "Well, that means that you believe that the world is the creation of God." He says, "Of course." But doesn't that mean that the creation is the manifestation of God's presence? Doesn't it say in Psalm 24, the earth is the Lord and the universe and everything that's in it? Then isn't every aspect of the natural world a manifestation of the divine inner world? Isn't its degradation an ultimate impiety? He said, I never thought about that. And that, of course, is part of the tragedy, that religion, which should be in the forefront of this subject more perhaps today than any other, is often not seen by religious people as being particularly relevant. And it is ultimately the natural world as a manifestation of the divine. How we relate to it is surely how we ultimately relate to God. Our failure to be able to respect the natural world, our willingness to be party to its degradation, is an ultimate impiety against the Creator. And of course, as you all know, the Hebrew Bible states right at the beginning that the human person was placed in the Garden of Eden, le'ovda or le'shomra, literally to work it and to preserve it. Or, in other words, sustainable development, responsible stewardship. That is actually the responsibility of the human person, explicitly stated within Genesis. There is, many of you be familiar with a wonderful little midrash that expounds on this idea, that is in Kohelet Rabbah 28, which says, "In the hour when the Holy One, blessed be He, created the first human being, He took him and let him pass before all his works in the Garden of Eden, and said to him, 'See my works, how fine and excellent they are. All that I have created for you, I have created them for you. Think upon this and do not corrupt or destroy my world, for if you corrupt it, there is no one else to set it right.'" Arguably the most central precept of Judaism, which our sages describe as being the original precept as a manifestation of God's love and gift to the children of Israel, is the Sabbath, the Shabbat. Shabbat is a paradigm of sustainability. It actually seeks to regulate the restarting, as it were, of our relationship not only with the society but also with the natural world. And beyond the Sabbath itself, which of course in which we allow things to recuperate, and the general recuperation not only of the human person but also of the natural world around you is central to it. It is expanded even further within the sabbatical year. Sabbatical year is a year of restoration, of balance, social, seeking equity, but recognizing also the inextricable relationship between that equity and the physical earth, and the need for the earth to be able to recharge its batteries, as it were. This was an ancient form of sustainability that we know from the agricultural practices in the ancient world. And it's a central concept. But perhaps the most important concept within Jewish law regarding sustainability, in as much as it applies at all times, in all places, to all people, is the principle of Bal Tashrit, the prohibition against wanton destruction. It, of course, appears in Deuteronomy chapter 20, verse 19, in relation to the prohibition against cutting down fruit trees when, in a defensive war, one is trying to prepare to protect people with the necessary tools of warfare. And our sages draw an a fortiori argument. If in a situation of where you are required to avoid destroying the natural resources, when you are defending yourself, or when you have in a situation which involves your defense, how much more so in a situation when you are not involved in having to defend yourself. And our sages expand this concept of Bal Tashrit, the prohibition against wastage, to any wanton destruction. That's in Tractate Kiddushin 32a. With regards to any waste, Brachot, Tractate Brachot 52b. And also to over-ostentation and over-indulgence. That's both in Chulin 7b and in Shabbat 140b. Let me quote from two very famous sources regarding the importance of this particular prohibition. The first passage comes from the 13th century work, the Sefer HaChinuch, which enumerates the commandments in the Torah. It is attributed to Rabbi Aaron Halevi of Barcelona, though that authorship is highly disputed. And concerning the commandment against destruction waste, 529, he states, "The purpose of this commandment is to teach us to love that which is good and worthwhile and to cling to it, so that the good becomes a part of us and we avoid all that is evil and destructive. This is the way of the righteous and of those who improve society, who love peace and rejoice in the good in people and bring them close to Torah. That nothing, not even a mustard grain, should be lost to the world. That they should regret any loss or destruction that they see, and if possible prevent any destruction that they can. Not so are the wicked, who are like demons who rejoice in the destruction of the world and thus destroy themselves." And the Chinuch goes on to say that he who is guilty for wanton destruction will have to answer for it in terms of the day of judgment and will not have divine protection for those offenses of wanton destruction that will be requited from him, in, if you like, in a kind of payback, in terms of midah for midah, in terms of consequence for your actions. But a later source, the great rabbinic scholar of the 19th century, Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch, considered this concept of Bal Tashrit to be actually foundational for the whole of Judaism. For Hirsch, the goal of the commandment is not only to instill in us an awareness and appreciation of God's gifts, but also to ensure the essential limitation and discipline on our own personal will and ego. He writes about this in his work Chorev, section 397. Only if you use the things around you for wise human purposes, sanctified by my word and my teaching, only then are you a mensch. Mensch, of course, is the German word and used in Yiddish for a human being, but he means it a true, decent human being. And only then do you have the right over that which I have given to you as a human. However, if you destroy, if you ruin at that moment, you are no longer truly human, and you have no right to the things around you. I, says God, lent them to you for your wise use only. Never forget that I entrusted them to you. As soon as you use them unwisely, be it the greatest or the smallest, you commit treachery against me, against my world. You commit murder and robbery against my property. You sin against me. This is what God calls unto you, and with his call, God represents the greatest and the smallest against you, and grants the smallest as well as the greatest a right against your presumptuous. In truth, there is no one closer to idol worship than one who can disregard the fact that all things are the property of God, and who then presumes also to have the right, because he has the might, to destroy them according to a presumptuous act of will. Indeed, such a person is already serving the most powerful of idols, of anger, pride, and above all ego, which in its passion regards itself as the master of all things. Very powerful passage. The overindulgence, or the lack of respect for our natural resources, is, of course, a threat to sustainability in and of itself, but it is also a means by which we harm and do damage to ourselves and to others. This responsibility to take care of ourselves is, of course, codified by Maimonides in Chot on the basis of the words in Deuteronomy, you shall take great care for your souls, for your physical well-being. But also in Hilchot Rotzer, he goes on to say that this obviously does not just apply to ourselves, but applies to our behavior towards others. And if we can do anything to prevent harm to others, and we do not do so, then we transgress the prohibitions that are articulated in the book of Leviticus chapter 19 of Lo ta'amod al dam re'acha, you shall not stand idly by while your brother's blood is spilled, and lifnei iver lo titen mikshol, you shall not put a stumbling block in front of the blind. In other words, you are not revealing the reality that people have to contend with and need to address. The rabbinic legislation goes further in this regard and lays down also restrictions and responsibilities that pertain to pollution of the environment, and especially, principally, how it affects other people. So that, for example, tanneries have to be placed at a distance away from where people reside, and even things like threshing floors where where rodents can come in and be a source of harm to people, also need to be kept apart. So you have extensive legislation with regards to protect people against the dangers that can cause harm to their health and to their well-being. But above all, the real challenge that Bal Tashchit is concerned with, of course, concerns the over-indulgence that I referred to before, and the attitude of waste, which is explicitly prohibited. Pope Francis, in his encyclical Laudato Si, refers to a culture of waste that is prevalent within our society today. But the prohibitions against a culture of waste were already there within our rabbinic heritage already 2,000 years ago. And many of us that grew up in observant homes will have been instructed never to waste and always to take portions that are suitable for our own particular needs and not what you'd often tend to see at wedding and other festivities amongst the Jewish people within society, or at hotels, where you see incredible amounts of wastage that are in fact an offense against this particular prohibition within Judaism. But this Western lifestyle is not only a matter of waste and failure to respect the natural resources, it also, as I am implying, is also a matter of the threat that it poses to our well-being, not just through the pollution of our resources by our lifestyle, but above all to the broader global destruction. I will explain in a moment how many? 5? I'll explain in a moment actually the extent and the ramifications of this, but the lifestyle that we employ within our Western world has many ramifications in terms of even daily conduct, not least of all our diet. And the most damaging source to our environment today is the livestock trade. In fact, the United Nations study, Livestock's Long Dark Shadow, something like that, shows that the livestock industry and the consumption of animal products does more harm to our environment than all the forms of transport all put together. And it's in some very obvious ways. 17 times the amount of water to be able to produce 1 kilo of beef that could produce the grain. Rainforests destroyed in a massive manner that of course affects the whole ecosystem in order to be able to provide grazing for animals that are not slaughtered for mass consumption. A plant-based diet would free 75% of arable land. It would reduce 70% of greenhouse gases, the methane produced from the whole particular industry. It would release 50% of water that's being used at the moment, and it could save 8 million lives annually. And this, of course, in addition, therefore, to the whole issue of Partnerschritt, in the issue in the question of global warming that is created also by our overindulgence within the livestock industry. And in addition to these wastage of resources that I've spoken, you have the whole question of global redistributive justice and the outrage that the West can find itself consuming on such a scale while so many people are starving and languishing in hunger. One is reminded of the wonderful words attributed to Gandhi, that there is enough food in the world to feed us for human feed, but there is not enough for human greed. And this actually therefore has clear implications, I would say clear halachic implications with regards to what kind of dietary lifestyle we employ. And that is not to address the whole questions of the massive cruelty involved in the livestock trade today, something way beyond anything our ancestors could have ever envisaged, and that people are, generally speaking, oblivious to. In Leviticus 26, you have the famous passage, which of course is to be found many times within Deuteronomy, and one passage of chapter 11 particularly is within the Shema, the prayer that we recite every morning and evening, that talks of how when people will follow the divine word and commandments, then we will have its rains in its season, our harvest will be good, our productivity will be blessed. But when we fail to observe the commandments, then we will not have proper rains, we will not have proper harvests, and we will not enjoy the natural resources of the world. In the Middle Ages, commentators explicitly like the Abarbanel and implicitly like Maimonides understood these kind of language as metaphors. Or to use the phrase that they borrowed from the Talmud, the Torah speaks in the language of people. In other words, when you want to speak of spiritual consequences, you need to use imagery that comes from the simple farmer that the farmer can understand. But today we can see this concept literally as never before. Because were we to follow the divine injunctions with regards to our responsibility to fellow human beings, and especially to the vulnerable, and to avoid pollution, and to avoid waste, and to be more concerned with the health of the natural world around us and of people's ability to benefit from it, then we wouldn't face the crises that we are facing today of acid rain, of global warming, of destruction of our environment on a massive scale. Well, perhaps we weren't always conscious of it, but we could redress it. If we were to redress it by following those particular precepts and leading a lifestyle that's in consonance with those precepts, then it could be very different. So I conclude with a comment by the environmentalist Gus Speth, very famous comment. He says, "I used to think that the top global environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and climate change. I thought that with 30 years of good science we could address these problems, but I was wrong. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with these, we need a spiritual and cultural transformation. And we scientists don't know how to do that." But that is precisely what Jewish environmental ethics seeks to teach us to do. Thank you.